Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course, my underwater train finders, Thomas Ward, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Some Dude 267, Longsight, Joshua Long, and Ohio Trucker 1. You are the reason why this content remains a battle royale. And yes, today I have something new and exciting in store for everybody, and I sincerely hope you guys enjoy this weird and wacky idea I came up with, because I was trying to think of a way to expand upon my top 5 lists, things we've already discussed before, or things that are just debated in the railroading community. And I wanted to come up with a fun way to examine certain elements of famous locomotives, and I said, well, what about a tournament arc? Oh yeah, we're doing it. So without further ado, I would like to welcome you all to the Roundhouse Rumble, baby! In this not exclusive, it's on the internet, Roundhouse, we are going to take a bunch of locomotives, all of which are famous in their own rights, and pit them against each other in a contest of strength, skill, and frankly popularity. This feature event is actually going to feature all of you! Everyone involved will be allowed to share their opinions on the subject, make their voices heard in the comments, and vote on each individual matchup. And I thought I might do something a little interesting, because my audience has a bunch of people from the US and a bunch of people from the UK. I know both groups are out there and rather vocal. So I said, well, how about we make the first round of the Rumble US versus UK? Who has the best preserved steam locomotive? Oh ho! I've already picked a big debate topic for this first one. Now, I want to preface this whole thing before I begin is that this is all really just for fun, to enhance discussion and interaction between rail fans. It is by no means meant to spread toxicity, or hate, or division among the community, and I genuinely want everyone to have fun debating each locomotive's pros and cons. Additionally, you may be wondering what factors I'm considering when it comes to who wins each matchup, because I decided to not just make this a popularity contest. Because while I know I have a ton of UK fans, the vast majority of my audience is in America, and that's going to give the American locos a significant advantage, and I thought that would be unfair. So while the audience's favored choice is definitely going to be a factor, much like a real sporting event where certain teams have home field advantage, everyone also loves a good underdog story, and I wanted to consider other elements of each locomotive, such as how genuinely good was their particular class in operation, the aesthetics and fame factor, namely how good did they look, and how famous really are they in the world, and last but certainly not least, their story. The nice thing about preserved locomotives, and one of the things I enjoy the most, is that each locomotive has its own story to tell, how they wound up in preservation, and some are a lot more interesting than others. So I definitely want to take it into account for this particular Rumble. The way this will work is that the 4 starting matches will be explained and presented in this video, and we'll all have to wait till next week to figure out who won those and who's fighting who. I also decided to divide the locomotives up in the beginning between America and the UK, so the last round really will be the best of the best from the respective nations involved here. And I want to make sure you all know that I'm definitely going to view this from an unbiased perspective. Each locomotive I present here is amazing in their own right, and deserves to win for a variety of reasons. Nothing about this should take away from that, and whenever I do my judgments, the nation of origin is a factor I am not going to consider. You guys know I'm an American, so you might be thinking I might be a little biased towards the American locomotives, but I want to tell you, that's not going to be relevant for me. I'm not going to even think about it, I'm going to look at the locos as they are. So with that, let's introduce our contenders! Our first challenger comes to us from a little place known as Roanoke, Virginia. Built in May of 1950, she's a Class J 484 Northern Streamline Steam locomotive. She's been called the Spirit of Roanoke, the Queen of Steam, you know her, you love her. It's Norfolk and Western 611. Now 611 I would think has a genuine shot at progressing here. Not only is her story interesting, but she's an incredibly famous locomotive, and the Class James were a phenomenal design, capable of hauling both express and freight trains effectively. 611's aesthetics are gorgeous, and she definitely encapsulates that royal look you'd expect from a locomotive called the Queen of Steam. But her challenger is not to be underestimated. Constructed by Alco in December of 1944 for the Union Pacific Railroad, she is known as a living legend, an FEF-3 484 Northern type steam locomotive. She's distinctive as the only steam locomotive owned by a major railway in America that has never been retired, still riding the rails to this day. Everyone please put your hands together for Union Pacific 844! Now this first round is definitely going to be an interesting one because 844 is quite literally a living legend. Her distinction of never being retired is super relevant to this, and the FEF-3s are a phenomenal type of locomotive, with a top speed that is largely unknown. If she was ever given a shot, 844 might be able to break the steam locomotive world speed record. And all this is going to make this particular matchup interesting. But for our second matchup, we have two more interesting American steam locomotives. She was constructed by the Lima Locomotive Works for Southern Pacific in May of 1941. She is the sole survivor of the GS4 class of 484 Northern type steam locomotives. She is sometimes called the Daylight, named after the express she's known to pull, and she was once used to pull the American Freedom Train. Something I think is super relevant in this particular bout. Everybody give it up for Southern Pacific 4449! 4449 definitely has a real shot here, purely because of crowd factor. She's one of the most distinctive steam locomotives ever built, instantly recognizable due to that amazing orange paint job. Given how prevalent she's been, she's probably one of the most famous locomotives in North America. And she actually has quite a backstory that could definitely win her some bonus points. But her first bout is gonna be a big one. He is a 4-cylinder, simple articulated 4884 locomotive, constructed by Alco in 1941. He was known to pull the heaviest trains of Union Pacific and holds the record for being the largest operational steam locomotive in the world. When combined with his tender, he weighs in at an outrageous 1,198,500 pounds. Everybody please welcome Union Pacific 4014 Big Boy! Now, 4014 is definitely going to be a strong contender purely because of the legacy and the notoriety of the Big Boy as a class. They're one of the most famous locomotives in the world, and 4014's tractive effort and power output is nothing to sneer at. But he does have a bit of an Achilles heel, I feel, in that 4014's backstory isn't quite as sympathetic or interesting as some of the other locomotives he's going up against, so he's really going to have to lay into that size factor, but even that by itself gives him a solid chance. But don't think this is purely an American show. Oh no. Like I said, this is US versus UK, and we've got 4 more locos coming to us from the United Kingdom, all of which are going to be phenomenal contenders from the people that invented steam engine technology. Our first one is one of the most famous locomotives in the United Kingdom, constructed in 1923 at Doncaster Works for the London and North Eastern Railway, using the brilliant design of the legendary Sir Nigel Gresley. A 462 Pacific steam locomotive, he may be the oldest locomotive in this tournament, but with age comes wisdom and legacy. Everybody raise your hands in the air for the great, the legendary Flying Scotsman. The Flying Scotsman's got a real shot at this, purely based off of the crowd factor. The Scotsman is one of the most well-known locomotives, not just in the UK, but in the world. Even in America, we know what the Flying Scotsman is. Everyone loves this locomotive, and as a Class A3, it serves as one of Sir Nigel Gresley's greatest achievements. The only thing I could think of that might be a bit of a weakness is the age factor. Not that it's going to change the story involved here, but the fact is, because the Scotsman's got an older design, pretty much every other locomotive could be considered a bit more capable of operation. But I don't think that's going to hold him back, because his story and legacy are going to be nearly impossible to beat. But the Scotsman's got a worthy challenger today. Another 462 Pacific steam locomotive designed by Robert Riddles. He was built at Crew Works in 1954 for use by... darn it! Every time with this. British Railways, okay. He's considered one of the finest steam locomotives ever to run on British rail lines. Please, everyone, give a warm welcome to number 71,000, Duke of Gloucester! Now, the Scotsman's definitely going to put up a real fight here, but I don't want to underestimate the Duke. Not only is it a more modern design, but the Duke's got quite an origin story as well, and on some levels is arguably just as famous as the Scotsman. But what I will say that may hold him back is that his original form as the BR Standard Class 8, before he was saved from scrap and remodeled, wasn't very good. And that's got to be a consideration when you talk about preserved locomotives. Yeah, the Duke's awesome now, but he wasn't originally, whereas the Scotsman's pretty much always been awesome. But we can see what the audience has to say about that. But don't head for refreshments in the restrooms just yet, folks. We have one more matchup to introduce to you. And these two are operational preserved examples of what many consider the finest steam locomotives that the United Kingdom has ever produced. Designed by the great William Stanier, a 460 steam locomotive. He is a member of one of the most prevalent types of steam locomotives ever produced, not just in the UK, but the whole world. Built in 1937 and not withdrawn until August of 1968, this locomotive still runs the rails over in the UK, operational and mainline certified. Everyone please give a standing ovation to number 45407, Black 5, the Lancashire Fusilier. Now, I think the Fusilier's got a pretty good shot at this, not necessarily in fame factor, but just because it's a Black 5. The Black 5s are one of the most famous locomotives in the UK, and they built a ton of them and kept using them until the last day of steam on British railways. That's a legacy that's hard to compete with, and they had very little wrong with them. The only thing that might hold Fusilier back here is that the origin story for this loco isn't quite as interesting as some of the others we've already mentioned, but we'll see what happens. Our final challenger in the tournament is not to be trifled with. One of the largest and most powerful steam locomotives ever constructed for British railways. A massive 210 steam locomotive designed by Robert Riddles. Everyone please give a shout out to number 92203 of BR Standard Class 9F, Black Prince. Now, I gotta be honest, I'm kind of rooting for the Black Prince here, only because of how awesome I think the 9Fs are. They were a phenomenal technical achievement for the UK, and I think they'd be a lot more famous had they not shown up so close to dieselization on the lines. The Black Prince has an awesome name, by the way, I just wanted to stress that, and I think the only thing that might hold them back is the fact that they didn't serve for very long. They're great, yeah, but a lot of the other locos have a much longer legacy. But even though I'm judging this from an unbiased perspective, I gotta admit, on the UK side, kind of pushing for the Black Prince. And with that, you have our first rounds. Please check in the description below this video to cast your votes. And next week, we will see which locomotives are victorious in their matches and which ones are being sent to the scrapyard. I'm just kidding. Nobody's getting scrapped here. I told you. This is all for fun. Please don't yell at me. We're having fun here. Why can't we have fun? Remember to cast your votes, and I'll see you all next weekend for the results of the first matches and introducing the matchups for the second round. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell. Roundhouse Rumble!